Yo, what's going on, guys? Crispy Flakes here. Welcome to Extra Crispy. For today's video, we have a video by Austin Sweat titled The Worst Draft Day Comparisons of the Last 10 Years. I know there's been some bad ones. I know, like, Andrew Wiggins was supposed to be the next LeBron James. I know my man Mike Korzemba said Lonzo Ball was Stephen Curry with a 60-inch vertical. He actually changed the title of that video to Stephen Curry with a 90-inch vertical, which is really funny because it's cool he's, like, playing, like, the joke and everything like that. But here we go, man. Let's check out some of the worst draft day comparisons over the last 10 years. I'm sure there's going to be some bad ones.
Every single player over the past 10 years has had some sort of comparison when entering the NBA draft. Some have been spot on, and these players have turned out to be exactly how scouts expected. And then there's others that have been flat out terrible, and didn't make any sense back then, and still don't now. And those are the ones we're looking at today. Now, all these comparisons came from NBADraft.net, and of course I get it'd be impossible for them to predict everyone's career perfectly, but that's the fun part. That's why we're looking back to see just how wrong these scouts were based on how these players turned out. And we're going to look at all the bad comparisons from all of the past 10 years from 2008 to 2017. There's more from some and less from others, but at least one from every draft. So with that being said, let's start with 2008 with Jerryd Bayless.
He was a pretty good player,
Most of the casual NBA fans probably don't even know who Jerryd Bayless is.
Oh, he used to be a solid scorer for the Memphis Grizzlies. Like, he was okay. He was a decent scorer. Like, he wasn't a superstar, but Jerryd Bayless used to be nice.
Know him, you know he's never been more than a decent bench player that's bounced around a bunch of teams the past 10 years. But coming into the league, the hopes were a lot higher for him because going into the draft, Bayless was getting compared to Gilbert Arenas and G. Williams. I mean, from how he played in college.
You know what? I actually don't hate it. I mean, no, he's clearly not Gilbert Arenas. Guys, I'm sorry. I'm going to try not to pause so much, but I got to give my opinions on this. Jerryd Bayless was actually a good scorer, though. Like, he had the range. So, yeah, Gilbert was more consistent, but Jerryd Bayless could still put the ball in the basket. So, it's not the worst one in the world.
Kinda makes sense, but for how he's played in the NBA, they couldn't have been any more wrong. I mean, Arenas was an elite scorer and playmaker, and Bayless was a good corner three-point shooter. And then the other bad comparison from 2008 was Michael Beasley.
I'm not gonna look it up.
You know that someone who played as good as Beasley did in college and wound up as bad as he has been had to be on the list for the comparisons he was getting while at Kansas State. Beasley had one of the best college seasons ever, putting up 26 and 12 on 56% shooting and 38% from three. He was so dominant as a freshman that he ended up getting comparisons to Carmelo Anthony.
I guess I knew it. He played like Melo. Biggest issue with this man, it wasn't that the talent wasn't there. Michael Beasley is talented. He just doesn't always try. He doesn't always care. And that was his downfall, man. He just didn't have the passion to be great. He could have been great.
Those comparisons had flashes where they looked accurate,
he could have been great.
Pretty much ever since then, he couldn't be any further from it. So with the way his career ended up, this one's just been horrible. And then we go to 2009 with Hasheem Thabeet. Alright, Thabeet was an okay player on offense, just scoring over all the smaller players, and a dominant 7'3" shot blocker on defense.
I thought he was going to be good.
Which is why he got drafted second overall.
I thought he was going to be good.
Draft comparisons to Dikembe Mutombo. Hasheem dominated on defense and averaged over 4 blocks a game for his 3 years at UConn.
You know, you look at him in college, though, like 7'3", great defensively, offensive game, not quite there, but capable. It's not a bad comparison. It's just he didn't live up to the hype. Like, yes, if Hasheem Thabeet, see, he's so bad I don't even know his name. Thabeet, if he would have, like, actually panned out, he could have been that. He could have been.
But just because a 7'3" guy is able to block a lot of college players doesn't mean he needed to be picked second overall or compared to an NBA Hall of Famer. Because besides that, he really didn't know what he was doing. Speaking of second overall picks who turned out to be a bust, that leads us to 2010 with Evan Turner, who got compared to Brandon Roy. Now, if Turner lived up to the hype, there's a good chance these comparisons would have made sense, but he didn't. He did have one of the more dominant seasons in college.
He played for Ohio State.
He was athletic, good around the rim, could shoot pretty well, and was honestly being considered to be taken over John Wall. But the second he got into the NBA, that all changed. He instantly looked like an average athlete compared to his competition.
His jump shot was trash.
Stagnant on offense, and his game's never really been able to translate into an NBA
He had some decent
I mean,
seasons.
everyone that gets drafted looks great in college, but not everyone can be a star in the NBA. 2011 First, with
Enes
Enes
Kanter.
Kanter. This one doesn't make sense for back then,
Uh-oh.
and it still doesn't make sense now.
Uh-oh.
Because Enes Kanter's comparison was Al Horford. Horford's a player that can do a little bit of everything: block shots, rebound, pass, shoot mid-range and threes, and post up.
Enes Kanter
But
doesn't have
when
no
we think of
defense.
Kanter, we usually think of just a traditional big man. I do think Kanter's been heavily underrated for a while, but not that underrated. He doesn't play the same style or as good as
Not
Al
at all.
Horford. Klay Thompson.
Inside
Alright,
player.
this is definitely one of the worst comparisons on the list, and possibly of all time, because Klay Thompson's comparison was Marco Bellinelli.
Hey, you know what?
Bellinelli's-
You know what? If you think about it, I mean, Marco was a sharpshooter, so Marco Bellinelli is like a poor man's Klay Thompson. So, you know, he's a sharpshooter like that.
pretty
so.
much been known his whole career as just a three-point shooter, and Klay's turned out to be not only a
Klay has
100
the
times
defense.
better, but one of the greatest shooters of all time. Back then, his weakness was said to have been his athleticism, but that hasn't stopped him from being one of the best defenders and players
He
in
can throw it
general
down,
in the
too.
league for all these years. And the fact that scouts had Klay Thompson turning into a guy like Bellinelli is just hilarious to look back at this point. Kawhi Leonard. Alright, honestly, this one's not too bad, with Kawhi getting compared to Luka Mbah-a-Moute and Gerald Wallace. Kawhi's
I don't know,
offense,
that's-
even to this day,
Not
is a
trash, I
similar
think.
style to what Gerald Wallace had, and his defense is similar to Mbah-a-Moute. Now, he's 10 times better at both of those things than both of those guys,
Right.
but it's still a pretty solid comparison, especially with the
Okay.
players that had been in the league to that point. I mean, he really should have been compared to Scottie Pippen, but he didn't. But he made the
Scott, I
video
don't know
for
about
how
Scottie Pippen.
much...
Scottie Pippen was more like, I don't really have like a great comparison for Kawhi Leonard. Like, I can't think of one off the top of my head where it's just like, yeah, he's like, this is a player we've seen before. Kawhi Leonard's kind of like, because Kawhi doesn't really pass the ball a lot like Scottie Pippen does. He's more of like, you give him the ball and he just takes over. So
much better he became than these guys, and for his draft
That
report
was kind of his
saying
issue
things
on
like
Spurs and
this:
stuff. He didn't really pass a
Kawhi
lot.
Leonard does not have one aspect offensively that stands out or which allows him to consistently score the
They
ball.
all stand
He does
out.
not have a great touch around the basket and is not very disciplined on defense. He gambles far too often and leaves his teammates susceptible to giving up easy baskets. We're talking about the best defender in the league, the guy who has more steals
That's
than
debatable.
fouls. So they definitely
Paul
got this
George.
one wrong too. Tobias Harris. Okay, we've
Toby.
seen Tobias turn into a star this year, and we've seen how good of a scorer he's become. I mean, even back in high school, he was a 5-star recruit and played as a point forward in college. But even through that, draft comparisons still compared him to Chris Humphries.
What?
Come on now, this is getting out of hand. I get it, you can't predict how good everyone's
That's
gonna
garbage.
get. But when you're off by that much, someone needs to be fired.
That's
Alright, now
garbage.
let's look at 2012. The one and only player is Draymond Green. And this makes sense because
Zach
Draymond
Randolph.
wasn't great in high school, wasn't a standout in college, and was drafted in the second round. And even then, his career started out pretty slow. So we can't really blame anyone for this one, but the man was compared to Jared Dudley going into the
Ooh,
draft.
that's rough,
And I mean,
bro.
they both had similar styles and weren't the most athletic. So I'd say they did a decent job.
They're so opposite. Jared Dudley's like a sharpshooter, and Draymond Green is not that. Jared Dudley plays no defense. Draymond Green solely plays defense. That's the worst one I've seen so
Job
far.
of judging him as a player back
Oh
then,
my, dude.
but a terrible job of judging his potential. And now we got a lot from 2013.
Cody
First
Zeller.
with Cody Zeller.
Dwight
These
Howard.
things were expected from Zeller, who went 4th overall in 2013. But I still don't think he should have been compared to LaMarcus Aldridge. And
Yeah,
by
that's
the way
rough.
things have turned out, he shouldn't have. His draft report said that there was a very little chance that he'd be a bust. And I guess they were kind of wrong there. Because up until now, he's been nothing more than an average center in the NBA. Victor Oladipo. So now we got the other member of the 2012 and
I can't even
13
think of
Indiana
Oladipo, like,
team.
who'd be
And
compared to
this
him.
one's terrible too. With Oladipo getting compared to Tony Allen.
Ooh,
Victor's always been a great
that's
defender,
rough.
and he did take time to develop his offensive game, but his report said that he didn't have a complete offensive game and might not ever develop
He's got
one.
the defense,
And with
though.
him getting those comparisons to Tony Allen shows you just how bad they thought his offense was and could have become.
Good
We've
for
seen
him, though, man,
just
turning
how
it
good
around.
Oladipo's gotten on that end, and just how wrong he's proven these scouts to be. Ben McLemore,
Uh-oh.
another worst of the video and possibly one of the worst all time. Here's a quote from McLemore's draft report. He's a prototypical 2-guard with a mouth-watering combination of athleticism and shooting ability.
Okay,
Has
who's getting
elite level NBA 2-guard potential with the talent to eventually place himself among the top shooting guards in the league in his
Don't know about
prime.
that one,
And they
Chief.
compared him to Ray Allen.
What?
I mean, seriously.
Ray Allen? I mean, the man's decent offensively, but I didn't know damn Ray Allen. Oh
He
my.
did look good in college,
man.
but now
I'd be
he's
insulted
looking like
if I
he's
was
on his
Ray
way out of
Allen.
the league. He's still a good shooter and athletic,
I would be
but
insulted.
has nothing else great about his game, and is the furthest thing from Ray Allen that you could get. CJ McCollum. In college, McCollum was a great scorer and three-point shooter, but not enough to be compared to Steph Curry, which he was. I mean, to be fair, the comparison was made right before Curry made his first All-Star team and turned into the greatest shooter of all time and the two-time MVP we know today. But still, looking at what both these players have become, scouts had it all wrong. Rudy Gobert. Gobert is one of the top defenders in the league right now, but started out getting compared to Sean Bradley, the 7'6" man who didn't have an ounce of athleticism in his body and was in the league only for his height. But this comparison comes from the fact that Gobert...
Yeah, I bet you all these guys like Rudy Gobert and Draymond Green, they see who they're being compared to, and they're just like, all right, it's time to take things serious, time to take things to the next level.
Has one of the tallest standing reaches and biggest wingspans in combine history, and was pretty skinny at the time of being drafted. I mean, they did mention how Gobert was a good rim protector, but come on, he still deserved better than Sean Bradley. 2014, with Andrew Wiggins.
James.
We all know that media and fans compared Wiggins to LeBron and KD, and some sites had him compared to a mixture of Tracy McGrady and Clyde Drexler. But NBADraft.net had him as a cross between Vince Carter and Rudy Gay.
Oh my God,
Not gonna lie,
dude.
This isn't the worst comparison, but I did just have to mention him for all the other comparisons he got out of college and high school. Dante Exum. There were big hopes for Exum as a 6'6" point guard coming from Australia, and there usually always is for a point guard that big. Pause. And those guys usually get compared to Penny Hardaway, which is what happened to Dante.
Hey.
I mean, just because they're tall doesn't mean they're always going to be great all-around players like Hardaway was. And Exum has made that very
had bad
clear.
injuries,
He went 5th overall, but has never really been a starter or averaged over 8 points a game, and it definitely doesn't look like he ever will. Marcus Smart, easily one of the worst in the video, with Marcus Smart being compared to Dwayne Wade.
What?
If it hasn't been clear already,
Oh my God, dude, Marcus
is
freaking
up.
Fart. Oh my God, Dwayne Wade? Who is doing this? I want names. I need to send a letter. You're not compared this to Dwayne Wade?
Of the time, because the best athletes can make their games look a lot better than they actually are by being faster and stronger than most other players at their positions. But I mean, Dwayne Wade, they couldn't have been any more wrong. Smart has great fundamentals, but he's basically only known for his energy and defense and not for his Hall of Fame level play. 2015, Justice Winslow. This one's one of the worst and most accurate comparisons at the same time. Scouts compared Justice Winslow to James Harden. They had a similar style when he was in college, but since being in the NBA, they've got absolutely nothing in common. They're completely different players. Harden's a pure scorer, and Winslow's an all-around athletic player with good defense. So he's definitely no James Harden. But you think whoever made this comparison should be fired? But they also compared him to Wilson Chandler, which is also a weird two players to compare someone to. But like, since Winslow's been in the NBA, he has played a lot like Chandler. So strangely, this one was terrible and great at the same time. Kristaps Porzingis. Kristaps was compared to Andrea Bargnani and Pau Gasol, which really isn't the worst comparison for him, but he just makes a list for the fact that they didn't compare him to Dirk. Like, come on, they're twins. Stanley Johnson.
Oh God.
A lot of you might not have ever heard of Stanley Johnson,
please.
but he's the Pistons' backup small forward, averaging 7 a game for his career. Out of college, though, he got compared to Kawhi Leonard. Now, don't get me wrong, Stanley's a great underrated defender, but Kawhi and Artest...
Hell no, baby! No! Kawhi Leonard?
Lockdown defenders, and great on offense too, and Stanley Johnson isn't. So for now, they overrated Johnson by a long shot. 2016, Brandon Ingram. Brandon Ingram getting compared to Kevin Durant. I mean, do I really need to say anything? Besides their body shape, they got nothing in common as players. And finally, in 2017, we had Kyle Kuzma. Whoever predicted Kyle Kuzma to be a Jared Jeffries type player is insane. For those of you who don't even know who Jeffries is, this is him, and he averaged 4 points and 4 rebounds for his career on 25% from 3. And here's Kuzma, who's already averaged 17 and 6 on 34% from 3 on his career. Sure, Kuzma did surprise everyone, but still, looking back on this, it's terrible. Donovan Mitchell. Speaking of terrible, we've got Donovan Mitchell, who was compared to Norman Powell.
Norman Powell was supposed to be a beast.
Norman Powell. In these first 2 years of Mitchell's career, he's already had a better career than Norman will in his entire career. I mean, Donovan compares a lot better to a star like Dwayne Wade than anything. And it's not even like it took Mitchell years to develop, so they wouldn't have known how good he was. He started playing like a star in his rookie season, and just 1 year before scouts thought he resembled Norman Powell the closest. And finally, Markelle Fultz. Here we got the last one, and the fact that Markelle Fultz
This one, whatever it is, I'm not going to hate on it, because I still think Markelle Fultz has potential.
drew comparisons to James Harden.
Okay,
I mean,
you know what? Okay, I'm sorry, I take it back. That's trash.
There was some resemblance in college, but it's just funny to look back on now that this guy was thought to have been the next James Harden. And
you know what?
Actually, it's a
I would probably say his comparison, because, like, I would probably say Jason Kidd. Because Markelle Fultz, like, when he actually is playing good, I mean, he's like the youngest player to ever record a triple-double. Not an amazing shooter. Jason Kidd was not either until later in his career. You know, good rebounder, good passer. I mean, probably not the vision like Jason Kidd has, but like a poor man's Jason Kidd, I could see that.
a little depressing. But that's going to wrap up the video.
Some of those were bad. Stanley Johnson, Kawhi Leonard. I'm speechless.